Hello and welcome back to the Import Export Hub channel, everyone. Bogdan here. Thanks for joining me, by the way. I hope that you are all doing great. And guys, without prolonging this intro too much, allow me to cover the import dynamics of Iceland. And basically, I will show you the top 20 headings at a 4-digit level, as usual, that had the largest absolute changes in 2024 relative to the previous year, both positive and negative changes. While towards the end of the video, I will also show you the top 20 headings that had the smallest variability for the 2020-2024 timeframe, with the coefficient of variation as a proxy in measuring Iceland's most stable imports, and where you should pay close attention if you want to export those products towards Iceland, because in theory the competition is high and the supply chain and brands are well established there, but more on this in a couple of minutes. So first things first, in what concerns Iceland's largest absolute positive changes for the import flow, we see that automatic data processing machines had the largest absolute positive change. We're talking about almost $345 million, bringing the overall import figure for 2024 to some $638 million, which is by far the largest amount for this time frame. And what is more impressive is the 31% compound annual growth rate for the last 5 years. And here, guys, I have a challenge for you. Can you guess why we see these big figures related to automatic data processing machines being imported into Iceland? Please do comment, and let's use our processing power, our brains, to figure out. And remember, it's just for fun, and I will even give you a hint, which is cloud. So this heading sits on the first spot. On the second one, we see heading 8902. So we are talking about fishing vessels, and it makes sense, really, as the fishing industry in Iceland is the most important one. And here we see an absolute increase of some $116 million. While artificial corundum, so heading 2818, ends the podium with a positive change almost identical to the previous one, but much larger in what concerns the overall import figure for 2024. And then we see smartphones, preparations of kind used in animal feeding is also present, most probably for the fishing industry. So I'm talking about heading 2309 with a change of some $41.5 million. Then we see medicines, centrifuges is next with a change of almost $19 million. While towards the end of the list, we see parts of aircraft and spacecraft, heading 8807, most probably parts for the airplanes used by Iceland Air. Motor vehicles for the transport of 10 or more passengers sits on the 19th spot. And here we see a change of almost $11 million, while heading 9403, so furniture and parts thereof, not elsewhere specified, ends this top 20 list with an annual change of almost $10 million. And an overall import figure for 2024 of some $102 million. So, looking at this information, what insights can we extract? Firstly, if we look at the summary chart here in terms of the import composition and cumulative import values, Chapter 84 is by far the most important one, both in terms of value and the number of headings. And my guess is that Iceland's policymakers did a great job anticipating the demand and setting the framework, let's say, in place for the services related to my reader or challenge, if you want. Then we see Chapter 85, which, has 3 headings, but its cumulative imports are less than half of Chapter 28, which is another important industry in Iceland, and it relates to aluminium. And here companies working with aluminium are exploiting Iceland's absolute advantages in terms of energy costs, because as you probably know, The aluminium industry is highly energy intensive, and electricity costs in Iceland, thanks to its geothermal power, is very competitive. So, guys, these were some insights in terms of import composition and value. And another insight would relate to the compound annual growth rates for the last 5 years, which are almost all double-digit figures. So if you're looking to diversify your export market and you're dealing in one of the headings here, maybe Iceland it's worth considering. So guys, these were Iceland's top 20 absolute positive changes, and now I will take a look at the top 20 absolute negative ones. And here we see that on the first spot we have heading 8703, so we are talking about vehicles who saw a contraction of some $388 million. Carbon electrodes and carbon brushes sit on the second spot with a negative change of $140 million in absolute terms and some 25.4% in relative ones. While petroleum oils, so heading 2710, ends the top three podium with a negative change of $125.6 million, which translates into almost 11% in relative terms. And then the list goes on with, I don't know, hydrometers and aerometers. Fish, fresh or chilled is next, with a $15 million contraction. Towards the middle of the list, we see self-propelled bulldozers, so heading 8429, with a contraction of some $14 million. The heading relating to tractors is also present with $11 million negative change, while towards the end of this top 20 list, we see machinery for sorting, screening, or crushing ores, stone and other mineral substances, who saw an yearly negative change of $5 million. Tubes, pipes, and hollow profiles sits on the 19th spot with a $5 million contraction, while heading 7309, so reservoirs, tanks, and similar containers, ends this top 20 list. And as we can see together here, it had almost a $5 million negative change, bringing thus the overall import value for 2024 to some $5.1 million. And again, following the example from the previous sheet, let's see what insights we can squeeze out of this information. So from the summary chart here, we see that the number of unique chapters is considerably reduced if we compare to the previous sheet, with three clusters emerging from these top 20 headings, at least from a depth point of view. And I'm talking here about chapters 84, 85, and 73. While from a value point of view, chapter 27 stands out by far with some $1 billion in imports with just one heading. Sorry, which, let's face it, it is understandable as Iceland is heavily reliant on petroleum imports. Looking now at the compound annual growth rates for these top 20 headings, we see that we have just three headings with negative changes. The most important one, if you ask me, being heading 7607, so aluminium foil. And here Iceland is becoming a net exporter, with a particular relation in what concerns Iceland exports towards Hungary, but this is another story. While for the rest, we see that the headings concerning motor cars and wine are quite stable. And the same could be said about crustaceans, so quite stable demand in terms of consumer products. Let's not forget that the purchasing power in Iceland is quite high, while the rest of the headings are industry-related ones, some with double-digit growth rates, meaning that Iceland's economy showed resilience from the 2020-2022 hiccup, and companies felt confident enough to invest. So these were Iceland's top 20 headings that saw the largest absolute negative changes. And now, guys, I will take a look at Iceland's top 20 headings that had the smallest variability. where I anticipate that competition is high and where supply chains and sourcing partners are pretty well established. So if you're working with one of these products and want to export to a country with a high purchasing power, I think that you should pay close attention on how you differentiate your product. Also, an important point that I should make here is that in the table, I've filtered the headings which are equal or higher to $500,000 in imports, and then sorted them from the smallest to the highest relative to the coefficient of variation. And as we can see here, paints and varnishes sits on the first spot with a coefficient of variation of 0.025 and some $9 million in overall imports for 2024. Life plants is next with a coefficient of variation of 0.041, while glassware ends the podium with a coefficient of variation of 0.042 and some $5.3 million overall imports for 2024. And then the list goes on with, I don't know, jams and marmalades with a coefficient of variation similar to the previous one. What else do we see? We see milking machines and dairy equipment. Headgear is also present here with a coefficient of variation of 0.05. We see beer, so heading 2203 with a coefficient of variation of 0.063, while towards the end of the list we see shower baths, sinks and wash basins with a coefficient of variation of 0.065 and some $4.4 million in overall imports. Ceramic sinks and the like sits on the 19th spot, while carpets and other textile floor coverings ends this top 20 list with a coefficient of variation of 0.065 and some $2 million worth of imports. So quite diversified, with many chapters having just one heading, and here chapter 85 stands out in terms of overall import figures. So I'm talking about the electric instantaneous or storage water heaters heading, and if I look closely, most of the headings are related to private consumers with few industrial related headings, meaning that in terms of resilience, these headings managed pretty well to pass through the COVID intermezzo pretty well. Otherwise, nothing worrying, even though we see some negative figures on the compound annual growth rate column. So guys, with this being covered as well, my job here for today is done. I hope you've liked it. Don't forget to hit those small vanity buttons. And as usual, until next time, keep everything safe. Thanks.